Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
We are living in complicated times. We are caught up in the unique complexity of our lives, the pressures of our daily responsibilities, our careers, our children and grandchildren, our homes and neighborhoods, our schools and friends. And then to live in America in 2016, we are caught up in the complexity of our society. We bear witness to a seemingly endless set of images that tell a story of racism, sexism, fear, and violence. And if we have any energy left to spend on anxiety or despair, then maybe we have taken notice that our Jewish soul is fending off the onslaught of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and a bitter struggle amongst American Jews as to who speaks for our community. If I could convince you to stay for an hour, maybe I could talk about it all, the personal, the national, and the international challenges of this particular time in our lives. But we ask not only God, but also the Rabbi to have mercy on our souls. And so, with compassion, I am returning to just one of these three, the international, that is, Israel. In the last 2 months, I've talked with a congregant in his 20s, a retired volunteer for the Sanders campaign, who wanted to know how to talk about Israel with his coworkers in progressive politics, colleagues who stood by his side on national issues, but cannot abide when it comes to Israel and the Middle East. I've spoken with an employee of UCLA whose new position exposes her to the front lines of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on campus. The demands of her job and her gut loyalties to Israel both produce an unfamiliar, uncomfortable sensitivity. Congregants are terrified that Iran will use its nuclear power to destroy Israel. They wonder if they will be safe traveling to Israel with their children. And then there are all of you who haven't called. And I don't mean to parody the Jewish parents saying, "No, you don't call, you don't write." What I mean, truly, is that some of the people who sit here today have disengaged from the conversation about Israel entirely. I want to invite you back in. I know most of us are obsessively monitoring the US election, and if not the election, then our focus turns to our families and our loved ones. But alongside of those concerns is our challenge as American Jews to love Israel and to help her become the nation she professes to be. A nation that, according to Israel's Declaration of Independence, ensures complete equality of social and political rights to all her inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. A nation of pragmatists and dreamers, still building and defining what this country, our homeland, will be. A nation that needs you to be engaged. Let me tell you about my homeland. My first trip to Israel was when I was 12 years old. We were there during Hanukkah. I remember eating sufganiyot, donuts, every day. I was amazed by the Coca-Cola bottles with Hebrew lettering. I climbed Masada, I planted a tree. I loved Israel. When I was 15, I returned on a teen program for the summer. My memories include ice cream at the end of every hike, almost getting a tattoo in Eilat, and ordering a screwdriver at a bar in Jerusalem, only to realize I didn't like orange juice or vodka. But still, I loved Israel. After college, I spent 10 months as a volunteer. My time on kibbutz, working in a public school and living in an immigrant absorption center helped me connect with the people of Israel, not just the land and her beverages. My Israeli host family, who, it should be noted, did introduce me to the delicious combination of hot water and fresh mint leaves, shepherded me through the year, and then adopted me for life. And then things got complicated. My first year of rabbinical school began on the Jerusalem campus of Hebrew Union College on July 1st, 2001. That was the summer Sbarro's Pizza was bombed. That was the year we were told to avoid public transportation. not to shop in the shuk on a Friday morning. Don't go out on a Saturday night. I learned the geography of the West Bank from the nightly news, a refugee camp in Jenin, a terrorist from Beit Jala, an attack in Tekoa. And years later, I would return to Israel, and this time I would travel to the West Bank, to Bethlehem, to Hebron. I would listen to Palestinians talk about their lives, the oppressive restrictions on travel, the bleak economic prospects, the absence of justice when the perpetrators were radicalized Jewish settlers. I would meet peace activists from Palestine and Israel who persisted in the work despite the seemingly insurmountable challenges. I would drink espresso with Palestinian business owners in Ramallah. I would visit with the mayor of Efrat, a large Jewish settlement just over the Green Line. I love this country and her indefatigable spirit. I recognize it as the unrelenting spirit that I work to cultivate in myself and hope to teach my children. Here is a people who adopted Theodore Herzl's line, "If you will it, it is no dream," as a slogan of the Zionist movement. And my heart aches when I hear Israel's current political leaders and a significant percentage of the country respond to the question of Palestinian statehood with bitter cynicism and prejudice. I love this country and her spirit of innovation, high-tech, medical breakthroughs. They are making the desert bloom. And yet, this country of innovators cannot find a way to allow egalitarian prayer at the Western Wall or permit a Reform rabbi to officiate at a wedding, funeral, or conversion. Israel's struggle resonates with my struggle to recognize and appreciate the miracle that is this moment in time while still maintaining a deep dissatisfaction with the world as it is. This is the Judaism I was taught, and here is a nation that makes that struggle manifest in secular and sacred jurisdictions. And despite this deep resonance, as a 21st century Reform Jewish Zionist living thousands of miles away, there are moments when I feel distant and unconnected. Every year brings more complexity, but I've come to realize that the more time I spend wrestling and embracing this country and her people, the deeper my commitment grows. I am compelled to defend Israel and to challenge her. I am more than a tourist, more than a diaspora donation. I am part of writing Israel's next chapter, and you are too. To be a 21st century Reform Jewish Zionist is not only a mouthful to say, it is a daunting challenge. Anti-Zionism fuels violence and hatred in the Middle East and spills over into Europe and across the internet. It has taken root on our college campuses. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement encourages political parties, companies, and individuals to avoid doing business with Israel and makes an indelible mark on the experiences of Jewish students and faculty. The Israel that we love is under fire, and the goodness that we know to be true is neither recognized nor acknowledged. And the heartbreaking truth is that we are fast approaching the 50th year of Israel's occupation of the Palestinian people, a military decision in 1967 that has led to a seemingly permanent state of control over 3.5 million people who seek independence, self-determination, and economic opportunity. And we are more distant than ever from a two-state solution that would assure both Palestinians and Israelis a life of prosperity and security. A 21st century Reform Jewish community with love and fidelity to Israel must acknowledge that Israel's existence is in jeopardy not only because of Iran and Syria, but also because there is not enough political will from the leadership or the people to assure the future of a Palestinian state to exist side by side with Israel. Now, at this point in my life, it would be easy to surrender to cynicism. The world is broken. The Middle East is the worst example of it all. Nothing will ever get better. And it would be just as easy and equally dangerous to surrender to idealism. It'll work itself out. Someday we'll all get along. Peace, love, kumbaya. But rather than escape to either extreme, what would it mean to return fully to this moment and to live with the tension between what is real and what we wish were possible? What would it mean to try and live and work and love and wrestle from within this space? Parker Palmer, an author and a teacher, calls this standing in the tragic gap, the gap between our knowledge of what is and our knowledge of what might be. We've tried to make peace for 70 years, and we've been rejected repeatedly. And we've also seen world leaders return to the table to try again. Reform Judaism is constantly disparaged and marginalized by the ultra-Orthodox members of the Knesset, and in mid-September, Israel's Supreme Court rebuked the government for its failure to implement its own ruling to equalize prayer status at the Kotel, creating a place for all Jews. This is our tragic gap, the hard realities and what we know is possible, and we must learn to live within it. We must learn to act within it. The poet Audre Lorde wrote, "Sometimes we are blessed with being able to choose the time and the arena and the manner of our revolution. But more usually, we must do battle where we are standing." This is where we are standing today. Now, if you don't want to stand here, the alternatives are not much better. Parker Palmer says that when we opt out of standing in the tragic gap, we tend to move to one of two places. Either we surrender to cynicism, the product of embracing too much of those hard realities, or we are swept away by idealism, bred by too much possibility. The alternatives may sound 180 degrees apart, but in fact they take us to the exact same place, which is out of the action. They disengage us from the place in the gap where we need to stand in order to move things forward, in order for us not to be stuck. This year, let us pray for the strength to stand and act from within the tragic gap, and not just for today or for the next 12 months, but throughout the course of our lives. So how do we do it? How do we begin to stand and act in this gap and withstand the tension of this time and this space? How do we block out the siren calls of disengaged cynicism and unrealistic idealism? My good friend, Rabbi Benjamin Ross, taught me that the first essential step is rooting ourselves in all that inspires us about Israel. In Palmer's terms, this is what we know is possible. And so I remind myself that I am inspired by the efforts of the Israel Religious Action Center to defend the rights of Israelis and Palestinians who are threatened by discrimination and religious coercion. I am inspired by the reform movement's fight to create an egalitarian section of the Western Wall. I am inspired by the bereaved parents, Israeli and Palestinian, who make up the Parents' Circle. I am inspired by the Palestinian professor who created a dual narrative curriculum for Israeli and Palestinian students so that they could learn one another's stories. If we hope to stand and act within the tragic gap, then the hard realities must share space with what we know to be true, what we know to be possible. So first and foremost, what inspires you about Israel? You've heard about me. It may not be the same for you. Today, over lunch or perhaps at the beach, ask yourself or someone in your family, what inspires you about Israel? And as a side note, if the answer is nothing, then please Google Shimon Peres, may his memory be a blessing, and read anything that he has written in the past 20 years. The second step is an honest check-in about who you are and what you believe to be true, about Israel, about Zionism, about Palestinians, about Jewish Americans who lobby on behalf of Israel's interests. In High Holy Day terms, this step is called Cheshbon HaNefesh. We are all masterful at telling ourselves exactly what we want to hear. Are we ready to closely examine what we believe are the hard realities of this moment? Are there new possibilities that might shift how we see the world? And to achieve this step, it's worthwhile to come into community, to allow Isaiah and your fellow congregants to shake up your internal monologue, to create some holy disruption in your routine. So come and learn with us this year. As members of Temple Isaiah, you can attend 4 exceptional lectures on Israel, sponsored by the Shalom Hartman Institute. On Sunday, November 13th, 2 prominent journalists will speak from the left and the right about Israel's future. This February, you can travel with me to the J Street Policy Conference in Washington, D.C. In March, you can travel with Rabbi Nickerson to the AIPAC conference. You can experience Israel firsthand this summer by signing up for our next family trip, led by Rabbi Nickerson, Cantor Koyo, and Tamar Andrews. And if all of those learning opportunities won't fit into your schedule, then you should call us, any member of the clergy team, and we'll find time to talk with you, to answer your questions, to listen to your challenges, to decipher all of the acronyms from ADL to ZOA. And the final step is learning to stay in the gap. In High Holy Day terms, this is called teshuvah, returning to what is real and what is true. There is no final exam that will graduate you from the tension and the discomfort. We are in this for the long haul. But if we learn to stay in it, if we practice holding life's tensions, whether it's a teenager's rebellion, the character of our nation, or the future of our homeland, if we step back, breathe, allow our agitation to settle, and simply start paying attention, we often see new possibilities in situations that once seemed intractable. That is the self-awareness that we practice during our Shabbat Nigun service, our new contemplative service that takes place once a month. Return to your breath, return to the moment, return to the hard realities that make up our lives and also what is possible. The practice of teshuvah, this ancient wisdom passed down from one generation to the next, ledor vador, this practice is useful more than twice a year. So practice with us once a month at Shabbat Nigun as we learn the tools to stand and act from within the gap. Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, the founding chief rabbi of the Israeli settlement of Efrat in the West Bank, would often talk about his struggle to love Israel and to live in the country through the metaphor of coffee. Arriving in Israel for the first time in the late 50s, he reflected on the options for coffee, noting that you had 2 choices: Nescafe, which everyone called Nes, coincidentally, the Hebrew word for miracle, or Turkish coffee, so thick that everyone called it bots, the Hebrew word for mud, because the grounds sunk to the bottom and formed a thick sludge to be avoided as you finished your drink. And so, he surmised, you get to Israel and your choice is Nes or bots, miracle or mud. And this is how we can talk about Israel. This is how we could imagine our lives in Israel. This is what we might predict our future to be in Israel, miracle or mud. But there has to be something in between as well, something between the miracle and the mud. Parker Palmer calls this place the tragic gap. Tragic because there will always be a gap between the reality and the possibility, and we are asked to live and act from within that space. Between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we are perhaps more aware than ever of the gaps in our lives, the gaps between who we are and who we want to be, the gap between what we want for this country and what we want for this country and what is, and the gap between what we understand to be our mission as a Jewish people and how we manifest our communal destiny. For the next 10 days, we are challenged to identify these gaps and to consider how we might return to the space in between, to hold the tensions, to stand and act powerfully and purposefully from within the gap. My friend, Rabbi Yael Rydberg, writes that there is actually a very interesting parallel to the world of prayer. Jewish tradition teaches that we should face Jerusalem when we pray. The rabbis ask, towards which Jerusalem should we face? The Yerushalayim shel Mala or the Yerushalayim shel Mata? The heavenly Jerusalem or the earthly Jerusalem? The real Jerusalem of political conflict, thousands of cats, and garbage that doesn't always get picked up in a timely manner? Or the heavenly one of peace, ancient history, justice, and tikva, hope? The Jerusalem that struggles or the Jerusalem that doesn't? There isn't really a dispute, says one rabbi, as both Jerusalems face one another, and you cannot get to the heavenly one without traversing through the earthly one. So yes, there is garbage in the gap, but there is also goodness. There is heartbreak in the gap, but there is the possibility of your heart expanding. There is complexity and confusion, and there is also deep wisdom, if we can be patient enough to let the swirling waters settle. I am asking you to return this year and to practice standing in the tragic gap with me. For those who have opted out of the conversation, return. For those who have surrendered to cynicism, return. For those dreamy-eyed idealists floating above the fray, return. Return and let us learn together how to live and act from within the gap. Let us hold the tension between what is and what could be. It begins today. Let us pray from within the gap for the peace that we know is possible. Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kulam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kulam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Hey ho, hey ho.